Hello, my name is Marsha Pimentel, and I'm a second-year law student at Penn State Law, working with the Minglona Lab for Gender and Economic Equity. For the lab's Witnesses to History project, we are capturing the personal experiences of women during a dynamic era in the United States. Today, I have the privilege of welcoming Judith Constantino to join me. She's been a doctor, a mother, a grandmother, a wife, and so much more throughout her life. Thank you for joining me, Judy. I'm excited to speak with you today.
Happy to be here.
So we're going to start with your childhood. Can you tell me when you were born and where you grew up?
I was born in Pocatello, Idaho, on July 4th, 1937. And I spent the first 18 years of my life there. And then I went away to college. I came home for summers and things like that, but I never didn't belong to Pocatello until we moved back there again 20 years later. But
And who did you live with growing up? Who were the members of your household?
I had a brother who was 6 years older than me, and my mother and father.
And what did your parents do?
My father owned a business with his father. And his father and mother, my grandparents, lived across the street from us. So they were very much part of my life too. And my father grew up helping his father. And my grandparents immigrated to Pocatello to work on the railroad in 1903. And my grandfather started working right away, delivering merchandise that came in on the railroads to the people who were moving to Pocatello. And after 10 years, he got his own business. He quit the railroad and then he went and bought a horse and a wagon, and he started doing the same work exactly, but he was in business for himself. And my father was very young when he started accompanying his father in unloading cars of freight on the railroad. And sometimes the people had not arrived yet to get their household goods. And so my grandfather bought a building so he could put the furniture and so forth in the building and then deliver it when the people were settled. And then the business grew gradually from that. And after a while, that moving business wasn't so brisk, and so he took on farm implements to sell. And when my father and mother were married, my mother was 19 and my father was 21. And and my father pretty much ran the business. His father was older, in his late 30s when my father was born. So he was quite in his late 60s by that time. And so he wanted to rest more, and my father took over. And, and then my grandfather died, and my father truly was there alone. And World War II broke out after. There was a big depression. I was very small during that time. I was only, I was born in 37, so we were coming out of the Great Depression, and the World War II began in 41, and my my father was deferred because he was running an essential business, and his one employee was also deferred because he was the only employee. And my mother had two sisters who lived in Pocatello. And so my cousins, let's see, I had 5 cousins that grew up with me in Pocatello. My brother was the oldest, and I was next. And so the other 3 then came on later. But I had a good childhood. My father was employed even during the Depression years, and my mother was a homemaker. My grandparents lived across the street, so I spent time with them and was nurtured by the family quite well. And I was encouraged to achieve academically. I was always kind of shy, and so I could shine by getting good grades, which I worked hard to do. And I decided I wanted to be a doctor when I was 12 years old. I had a teacher who announced that men were better doctors than women. That's why there weren't very many women who did that. And women who had a knack for being nurses, so that's the way it should be. And I told him after class that I was going to be a doctor and prove to him that women were good doctors. I told him I might have the opportunity to save his life one day, and I'd be looking forward to it. Of course, he moved away from Pocatello, and so did I. Anyway,
This was your teacher when you were 12 years old?
yeah, I was a teacher, yes, that I was telling this to because he had said that it was better for men to be doctors and women to be nurses.
And had you seen any women doctors at that time?
No. Well, yes, we had a woman doctor in Pocatello, but she was older, and by the time I was aware of such things, she had retired. So I didn't know her. Actually, her son became a doctor. And I knew him well, but she was just someone that I had heard about. So I hadn't known her personally, but she was an inspiration because she was a doctor in the 20s.
And how did your teacher react when you told him all of that?
Oh, my teacher said I should rethink my plan because he didn't take me seriously, I'm sure. In fact, nobody really took me seriously. In my high school years, I told a lot of people that I wanted to be a doctor. But my parents, they didn't really believe me either, but they were always backing me. Whatever I wanted, they were willing to support my idea. And I'm sure they never, their wildest dreams, believed that I'd really become a doctor. But when I got to college and took pre-med, they encouraged me. And when I got to medical school, they decided I was really for real. So
So you said nobody else believed you besides your parents. How did that make you feel?
I suppose I expected people to react that way because that was the times we were in. And but in my heart of hearts, I knew that I could do it and I would do it. And I would surprise them, I sort of, that was, you just wait and see, I'll do this and you'll be sorry you didn't think so,
So it sounds like it almost drove you to want to be one more because
Right.
yeah.
You're absolutely right. I was stubborn. I just, if more people doubted me, the more I decided I was gonna do it.
That's amazing you knew that young. So going back a little bit to your childhood, so you had one brother who was older than you. Did your parents have different expectations for him than they did for you?
My father expected my brother to continue in the business, in the family business. But my brother went to college, and his freshman year, he expressed his interest in business and took classes that were appropriate. But by the end of his first year, he was having second thoughts. And in his sophomore year, he met a girl who was taking pre-med. And he was in love with her. But at the end of their sophomore year, they broke up, but by then he decided to be a doctor. And I always made him admit that it was my desire first. But if he wanted to be a doctor, okay. And so he went to medical school 6 years before I did. And but he always encouraged me. And when I was in medical school, I went to the same school he did. And he lived nearby. He was in an internship. I was a freshman. And I would go to his house on weekends. He was married at that point. And so, but we've always been friends. And especially as adults, as children, he was too much older than me for us to have a very close relationship. I was mostly his pesky little sister. But we liked each other, and we always have. And he became an obstetrician gynecologist and went back to our hometown to practice.
Sounds like you inspired him to want to be a doctor. And you said that you made him admit that
Yes.
you first.
Yes, I did.
Perfect. Do you remember grade school? Do you remember much about it?
I do remember grade school very much. I went to Washington School. It's no longer in existence, but my first grade teacher, I remember very well. Her name was Miss Dickey. She never married. but and I thought she was very old at the time. Looking back, I suppose she was in her mid-40s, late 40s maybe. We had to have shots before we could go to school. They didn't give us shots when we were babies, but we had to have the diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus. And my mother took me, they gave the shots at the school. And it was an army doctor who was there giving shots, and my mother took me, and I was terrified. I did not want a shot. I'd never had one, and I didn't want one. So I kept slipping out of line and getting at the end of the line again. And my mother took me to the first grade room where Miss Dickey let me sit in the back and watch for 10-15 minutes. And then I was taken back to the lineup for shots. And I was getting shorter all the time. And finally, I was the only one who hadn't had the shot. And it was only one shot. And it took that army doctor holding me down and my mother holding me down to get me a shot. It was a shot in my arm. And when it was over, I remember thinking, that was it. Oh my goodness, that was nothing. And we had to get a second shot a month later, and there took me to get that one, and I just was absolutely no problem. I got in line and got my shot. I remember telling my cousin, who was also in the line, that there was nothing to it, that this was going to be her first shot. I told her, be brave because it doesn't hurt, so don't cry. But
You said, so Miss Dickey, she was unmarried. Was that sort of uncommon for teachers to not be married?
no, it wasn't uncommon. I would say probably half of the teachers that I had at elementary school were not married. And some of them were older. I remember one kind of young teacher who just finished college and had her teaching certificate. I really liked her. She was my second grade teacher. And then there was Miss Woodland, who was my fourth grade teacher. And she was unmarried. She was probably in her 50s at least. And Mrs. Anderson was my third grade teacher. She was married. And then I had my sixth grade teacher was a man, which was kind of different. In seventh grade, we had men and women. And it was a man who had made the comment about women not making good doctors.
Did you have a dress code? Like, did you have to wear specific things to school?
No, not that I know of. My mother had ideas about what I should wear to school. And she made me wear long stockings in the winter, and I hated them. They were brown, and my friends all wore anklets all year, and I wanted to also. But I wore long stockings until I went to the seventh grade, and then she let me wear anklets in the winter. But I had to wear boots. I wore leggings and a winter coat in elementary school. And tie up shoes but then boots on top of those. And I like to walk in puddles all the way home, so I would get wet despite the boots and the leggings. And I know I had lost so many pairs of mittens that she tied them on me. They were, well, she had them on a rope between in the sleeves of my coats so they wouldn't get lost. And that was a good idea, but I didn't want that in 7th grade.
Did you have to wear skirts with your leggings, or was it just the leggings and the coat?
No, I had to wear skirts. Yeah,
Oh,
yes. Everyone wore skirts to school when I was in school. And so I was in school in the 40s and 50s, in elementary school, and then junior high and high school. Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah, let's shift towards high school actually. Did you attend a public high school?
Yes,
And you had to wear a skirt throughout high school as well?
yes.
Did you ever not like that, or how did you feel about that?
No, everyone did. I would have felt strange wearing pants. I mean, skirts, dresses, that was the skirts and sweaters were very popular. And
And what sorts of classes do you remember taking in high school? Or
I took science classes. I took algebra. They didn't offer the advanced math classes. I took algebra and geometry. And let's see. I don't think I took any more math than that, but I took chemistry. And I loved history classes and English classes. Literature and grammar were some of my favorites.
why did you like English and literature?
Uh, we had books assigned to read, and I have never been a good reader. Nobody had put a name to it then, but looking back, I realized I was dyslexic in some ways. And I had a lot of trouble in elementary school learning to read. It was probably 4th grade before I felt very proficient at reading. And I didn't get very high grades in elementary school. It was difficult. But when I got to junior high, I began to do better. And but in high school, my mother read books to me. And she read Moby Dick. And that I don't know, it's 1,000 pages or so. And she read every word of it to me, which was how I managed to get through that, because I couldn't read it all. She read all the books that were assigned, and then I wrote the review, the report, because I love to write and I love to listen to the books. I still do. I listen to audiobooks all the time now. But yeah, I never I never read a novel that I read on my own until I was 41 years old, and I had surgery and had to be at home recuperating for a couple of weeks. And I read The Thornbirds. Was the first novel I ever read on my own. And I was 41.
What is Thornsbirds about?
The Thornbirds.
Thornbirds.
Well, it was a saga of a family in Australia. And yeah, and three or four generations of this family. And they went from poor to rich. But there were lots of conflicts and setbacks and moves forward and all the intricacies of family life, starting in the 1900 and going on into the 70s or so. And yeah, it was a very popular book, a good book.
So you said your mom read your assigned books to you and you wrote the reports. Did she do that because she knew you had trouble reading in elementary and middle school?
Yes.
That's very nice of her.
And she loved to read. I got my reading problems from my father, I think. He was not a big reader. And my mother was. She read everything, and she read everything to me.
What about so in high school, did you have any movies or TV or music that you liked to watch or listen to?
I took piano lessons starting at age 6, and until I went for about 10 years before I gave up. And I never learned to play the piano comfortably. That was part of my dyslexic problem, I think. My brother took lessons and he played the piano beautifully. But my father was in a band as a teenager in high school and in college. And then the college in Pocatello, they partnered with the city and had a band and an orchestra that my father played in until I was 10 or 12 years old. And so every 3 or 4 times a year in the winter, they would perform, and my mother and I would be, and my brother would be in the audience listening. And so I learned to love marches and symphonies and all those things early on. And my parents played music on a phonograph all my life, as I recall. And in fact, when I went to college, I got a stereo for my birthday, and I took that to college with me. And it was part of my life enjoyment to listen to music, but I grew up in the years of Elvis Presley and so forth, and I belonged to a conservative Christian household, and my mother disapproved of Elvis Presley and his pelvic movements, and so I, of course, did not learn to listen to that kind of music. And so, but I always enjoyed music. And when my dad left to travel and we'd go places And sometimes we would go to Los Angeles and he would get tickets to the symphony there. And I heard famous conductors at times there. And yeah, no, those were very serendipitous times of life that I enjoyed and gave me an enjoyment of music. So,
And did you continue to listen to like classical music when you went to college on your stereo? Was that the same kind of music? When you
yeah,
went to college?
yeah, I had lots of vinyl records,
Mhm.
and I that's what that was what was the turntable when I went to college in 1955. And then they went to little ones, little 45s that just had one song on it. And then the bigger, long play records and yeah, I always had a music system in my house until I moved here. I now live in an assisted living.
So I want to go on to your college years, but before that, I did want to know, so today sex education and health are often a core part of high school curriculum. Did you have anything like that when you were in high school?
In high school,
Yeah, or middle school, just any sort of sex education and health regarding,
sex education did not know.
you did not?
My sex education from my friends on the street and from my mother. And, yes, my mother, uh, sex was something that we could talk about openly. My mother was open to that. In my house, in my parents' house, the only thing that you couldn't talk about was money. And yeah, I was always taught that my father worked hard and provided for us adequately, that we were not rich, but we were not poor either. And I always had nice clothes. My mother was always well dressed. And my father, he got dirty at work. So, but he cleaned up well. When he played in the orchestra, he was always in a suit and tie. And when he went to church, he was in a suit and tie. And so, but money, we didn't talk about the source of money. My parents played this little game where my mother had a budget supposedly, but if she ran over the amount she was given, she well she would go into my dad's pockets at night. He would bring the cash money home from the business in his pocket, just a big wad of bills, and she would take what she needed and not she never left him a note about it or mentioned it at all. They didn't discuss the matter. And unless she really took something that was way out of line, which she didn't, obviously. But she went shopping and she had accounts in the stores, and she signed her name, Mrs. Clarence Rush. It was like she didn't have a life of her own. She was just Mrs. Clarence Rush. And he'd get the bills and pay them. And what she would take out of his pockets was mostly grocery money. And at different times when, during the war, Second World War. I was pretty young, and we had, I remember rationing and we had coupons for things like gasoline and flour and sugar and some of the things like that, butter. And, my mother managed all that well, but yeah.
Apart from groceries and household items, was your mom also involved in any other financial decisions regarding your family?
No. My father brought home the taxes, he'd do his own income tax in the spring, and he'd bring the papers home and open up to the page where her name was, and she'd sign, but she never looked at it or even cared about understanding what it was. But now income tax just came on in the 30s, so it was not something that was too far along by the time my dad was doing his own taxes. But
I didn't know that.
yeah.
So, all right, yeah, let's move on to your college years. So you said you started college in 1955. Was that right after high school?
Yes.
And did your parents expect you to go to college?
Yes.
Excuse me. And where did you go to college?
Walla Walla College in Walla Walla, Washington. It is a small Christian college that is, it is a Seventh-day Adventist college. I was raised a Seventh-day Adventist, and that's where I went to college. My brother went there before me. So he had a reputation. He was very well liked and had been the president of this and that and so forth. So when I came along, well, it was a year after he left because he took 5 years because he changed his mind and decided to be a doctor. And so I was 5 years behind him. So he had been gone for a year when I came on the scene, but the name recognition was still there. So I got a couple of dates that year.
You got a couple of dates because of who your brother was?
Right. Yes,
Did you like going to Walla Walla?
I did. Yes, I did. It was the first religious school I'd gone to, but been raised in church always, so but I went to public schools until then. Yes, I did. I liked it. And I did well. I had to take some hard classes, the math classes. I went my freshman year. We didn't have the SAT and the ACT and stuff. But when I got to college, they spent 2 days putting me through tests to determine what kind of classes I should take. And unfortunately, I passed the math class test and I got put in what they called college algebra. Looking back, I think it was actually, what is that calculus? Because I don't understand a thing the guy said the whole semester. And every morning, it was 4 days a week. And every morning I got up and vomited because I was terrified of that class and I didn't understand what was going on. And the teacher really wasn't a very good teacher because nobody in the class knew what was going on. The top grade in the class was 58%. I got a 37%, and that was a C. Obviously, he graded on the curve. But I think it's not a very good sign when the person it only gets 58% of what he's trying to get across that anybody understands. So, and actually, a year later, he moved on to somewhere else. And the other math teachers, I went on to take trigonometry and solid geometry. And I was on a quarter system, actually. And so and that was the math that was required of me. And I got good grades in the rest of the math because the teacher understood how to teach. And I had something to build on from what I'd learned in high school. But anyway, I liked writing classes and grammar classes. I took a test on that, and I got the highest score that had been scored on that test up to that time. And so I was put in the advanced English class, and I was glad to have that. The books, I loved the books. I didn't have my mother to read them, but I really struggled, but I read, and I don't. Seems like now everybody has to take Western civilization or philosophy or something like that, but I didn't have to take that. I don't know back then. I think.
Did you get to choose any of your classes, or were they just assigned to you?
Oh no, I got to choose.
What are some of the classes that you
Things
chose?
that I had to take to go to medical school. And that was a problem because I also wanted to be a writer. I wanted to take journalism. I wanted to graduate with a degree in journalism and then go to medical school. Well, that turned out to be quite a big thing to do. and I actually, I never graduated from college. I had to drop out of a couple of classes at the end because I got sick. And so I was going to take them in the summer, but I had been accepted to medical school, so they didn't care whether I had a degree or not. And so I never graduated from college. But I had oodles of classes, credits, because I took a lot of journalism related things. But in addition, I had to take all the chemistry, three years of chemistry. And maybe, it was 3 years of chemistry. I had a minor in chemistry, and I had to take the required math and physics and some, things like that were required for medical school.
But you were working towards a journalism degree?
I was, yes. So I worked on the newspaper and also the yearbook.
And so did you also want to be a writer along with a doctor, or was that just a side thing?
Oh, I wanted to be a doctor primarily. That was a side thing. I used to think that I could practice medicine and have some other kind of life on the side. And I learned quickly that when I got to medical school, that it was all consuming and that I probably wasn't likely to have a job on the side as a journalist or, you know, just having a family and raising a family and being a doctor, I found was very challenging.
What made you want to be a journalist?
I like writing and I don't know. It it fascinated me, the investigative kind of things that some journalists do. That's what I was interested in. But that is a big job, a very time-consuming job. I don't know what I was thinking.
Were there other women journalists at the time that you were inspired by?
There were, Barbara Walters. She was, yeah, and I think she was the first female journalist who was a host on a morning show, and then she was also on the a co-anchor on an evening news. She didn't last too long with that, but it was an uphill battle for women in journalism, I'm sure.
So you said you were interested in investigative journalism. Was that due to anything political at the time, or it just?
No, I've always followed politics. I've voted in every election since I was eligible to vote, and that at that time, you had to be 21, and I turned 21 in 1958, and the next election, the next presidential election was in 1960, and that was between Nixon and Kennedy. And that was the first first election I ever voted in. And I grew up Republican in Idaho. My father had a small business, and my parents were Republicans. And I voted Republican reflexly, I suppose, like a lot of people. Until fairly recently.
Okay, so you left Walla Walla in 1959, and you said you didn't graduate?
I didn't graduate, and I had become ill in the spring of the year. I was just terribly overextended. I had 7 lab classes in my senior year, and so I had 2 lab classes on Sunday, and one every day otherwise. So I was busy, and one of them was physics. So, but one of the, well, I know it wasn't a lab class, but I had to take some kind of a physical education class. I chose skating, roller skating, and because it was an early morning class, it was the only thing I could fit in. So I was taking a roller skating class twice a week at 7:30 in the morning. But I also worked in the cafeteria at breakfast from 6 to 7 I was a checker in the cafeteria. And so I had to add in my head whatever was on the tray. People would come through and have all their food on their tray. And I had to recognize who they were and look them up in a file and then add in my head what they had on their plate and on their tray, and then write it down and go on to the next one. And then, of course, everybody was in a hurry. So I had done this for like 3 years, halfway through my freshman year, actually. I had done, I changed jobs from the chemistry lab I went to the cafeteria, and because it paid more, and because I could do it during meal times instead of class time. So it worked better for me, but I was very overextended at that time. And I was standing there adding up the people, and I see them coming, and suddenly I just fainted. And it carried me out and to the dispensary, and the doctor wrote me a script that said I had to take a walk every evening, and I had to drop 2 classes. So I did, and I was going to take the classes in the summer, like I said, but anyway, I was sick. I was out of school and off work for a couple of weeks. And then I was allowed to go. I needed the money to go for school, but I went back to work then, but I could only work the supper shift. And I got to sleep a little later in the morning. And then I worked supper, and then I went out for a walk every day. And then I came home and slept all summer. And then I went to medical school.
When you were applying to medical school, were you in college while you applied to medical school?
Yes.
And where did you apply?
I only applied to Lower London University, which is a Seventh-day Adventist medical school. It was the largest medical school west of the Mississippi at the time. And there were 96 students that they took from all over the world, but mostly from Adventist colleges, but they took others too. But anyway, there were 10 women in my class, and that was a very unusual thing. At the time, about 5% of medical students in the United States were women. So there were 10% in my class. And yeah, that was unusual.
So this was in 1959 or 1960?
1959,
1959.
in the fall of 1959.
So 10 women out of 96?
Yeah.
And how did you feel when you got accepted?
Oh, oh wow. I was very excited. Yeah. Well, we were all on tenterhooks waiting, and there were probably, let's see, of the women in my medical school, 3 of us came from Walla Walla. The others came from other schools, and the guys, they were, I can't remember how many there were exactly, but about 20, I think. Guys from my college who were accepted to the same medical school. And
Do you know if other women from Walla Walla also applied and didn't get accepted?
probably, yeah. I don't remember knowing any women who didn't get accepted. The three of us were the ones who had applied, and I knew both of them. So,
How did your parents respond when you got accepted?
oh, they were thrilled too. Yeah.
And your brother, he went to a different medical school?
Oh, he went to the same
Oh, he
one.
did. Okay. So was he still at medical school at that time?
Nope, he had finished his internship and he was moving to Salt Lake City to start a residency in OBGYN at LDS Hospital here in Salt Lake City.
How did he react when you got accepted?
Oh, he was thrilled for me. He'd been through the anxiety of, getting accepted and so forth. Because he had applied 5 years before.
So in medical school, were many of your professors women?
I didn't have any women professors.
None.
Um,
How did your professors treat you as compared to your male peers?
the professors were professional. They really didn't. They never put me down. They never made me feel less. No, they treated me with respect. That's something that I learned at Loma Linda that I really appreciate because they taught me how to be respectful to patients. And as I got out in the world practicing medicine, working with other doctors, some of them were not very nice to people. I guess we all have different personalities, but at Loma Linda, it was required that you respect the patient, and they taught you by example. And I appreciated that.
Did your male peers also similarly respect you and your female peers?
No, of course,
No?
no. There were all kinds of pranks they played on the women in the class, and you know, they found their ways to isolate us and put us down. But,
Do you have any examples?
pardon?
Do you have any examples that you can give us of some of the pranks or the ways that they put you down?
Oh, in anatomy class, they found things they could do to embarrass. They do anything they could to embarrass us, and you can imagine some of the things they could do in there. And physiology, chemistry, biochemistry, pharmacology. They weren't bad. They didn't mean to. They weren't mean to us. They didn't try to, belittle us or anything like that. They just tried to play tricks or jokes. Tell a dirty joke. I mean, we worked in a group of 4 on a cadaver. And there's this one guy in my foursome who just had a dirty mouth and he talked nonstop. So all afternoon in anatomy lab, I was hearing dirty jokes all the time. And he loved to do it mostly because I just turned red and was so advantageous that he couldn't resist. I got more than an education, but actually, the only person who fainted in a class, they were showing some surgical thing on the screen, and a couple of my classmates fainted, and they were both guys. we women were stalwart about it, and they were the ones who passed out. But it was kind of an expected thing in those days that women would be put down and teased and looked over. Sometimes it was very subtle. But if you worked hard and you got the grades, they respected you. So it was more after I got out of school that I had more experiences like that where men didn't think I was competent because I was a woman. So you had to work harder to convince them, but
And what kind of doctor did you want to be when you entered medical school?
a family practice doctor. Now, in those days, 80% of my classmates went out after graduation, took 1 year in an internship, general hospital medicine, and went out to practice. And probably half of them came back in a few years to take a specialty training, a residency. But most of us just expected to do general medicine after a medical school and a year of internship. And that was me. And it's naive in today's world, of course, but there wasn't any general practice residency when I did that. In the 70s, then people began specializing a lot more. And in 1978, I took board exams in family practice and became certified. But then I just had to learn it, on my own. I practiced then for 10 years, and so that was the expectation. Other people went back and took surgery residency in order to do general medicine. The only thing I learned in medical school and an internship was how to take tonsils out and deliver babies. I delivered 75 babies at LA County Hospital as a student. Well, not all of those were as a student, because when I was an intern, I delivered probably 20 babies. But
How long, so how long were you in medical school?
3
during
years,
3 years?
4.
4 years. And they had you deliver babies as a med student? That was,
Yes, we worked at LA County Hospital. And I had 3 weeks on OB, and we had to do, we delivered babies all day long. Uh, I got a lot of experience.
did you like doing that?
Mhm.
Did you like delivering babies?
Yeah, you know, I did, but I didn't want my brother was doing that for a living, and I didn't really want to just deliver babies. I wanted to do everything, I guess, and so I didn't go into OBGYN, but because of the volume that they have at county hospital, they use everybody, it's all hands on deck. And let me tell you, it's really all hands, because we delivered babies in bed because we couldn't get to the delivery room fast enough. And many times I delivered the baby all by myself. I didn't even have a nurse to help me. And because the women had maybe I was delivering there. I delivered a lady's 19th baby. And it was an interesting experience. I was terrified that her uterus was going to come out with the baby, but it didn't. And all went well. And she had 19 babies, which says that statistically, that's how many babies you would have if you had sexual intercourse regularly from puberty to menopause. The last baby I delivered was in a clinic in not a delivery room, and the baby was only 7 months gestation, and it weighed 1 pound 10 ounces. And in those days, this was in the 70s, and the baby didn't live past. We did get it all the way to the NICU. They were starting those in those days, but it died. I delivered at about 3:30 in the afternoon, and by midnight, when it was admitted there, it had died. So, but the poor lady had a baby who was 9 months old. She had a 9-month-old in her arms when she came to our clinic and said, "I think I'm having my baby." And I said, that couldn't be. You're not due for a couple of months. I'd been seeing her in prenatal clinic. Yeah, but she was right. She was having that baby. Anyway.
So this clinic, was this while you were in medical school, or was this something afterwards?
This was afterwards. This was when I was working in a clinic in San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. Yeah, I worked for LA County for 10, let's see, how many years? I worked for the city for 9 years, and I worked for the county for 10.
So you finished med school in 1963,
Right.
and you went right to work for the county or the city?
1963, I went to work in Glendale Adventist Hospital in a suburb of Los Angeles. And that's where I did my internship for 1 year. And then I went out and I worked for the city and the school system. And then, the school system. And then the city and the county merged. I worked for the county after that. And I did all kinds of clinics, outpatient clinics. I had determined by then that to get married and have a family, I needed to have regular hours and weekends off. So I had taken a job with regular hours. When I first got out of medical school, I moonlighted in emergency rooms. They didn't have emergency room doctors in those days. Everybody took their turn. And so I would work nights and weekends in emergency rooms to get extra money. And I made $1,200 a month for the first year that I practiced medicine. I thought I died and gone to heaven.
That was the year that you worked in the emergency rooms as well? Was that during your internship or afterwards?
After.
After. What was your internship like?
It was good. There were 12 interns in this hospital. And we worked in groups of 3, actually, in surgery. And as a part of surgery, we spend a month in the ER. And then we had 3 months of medical. And then we had 3 months of OBGYN. And then we had 3 months of whatever we chose. And I had thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist until I worked with a few patients. And then I realized that I didn't think I could have liked doing this for the rest of my life. So it was a good learning experience, though.
Were there so you said there was 12 interns. Were there other women interns with you?
No.
You were the only woman in your intern group? How did were the other interns from your medical school as well, or just all over?
They were from my medical school, actually. Yeah. And so I knew them all. And we got along well. Yeah, they knew me and I knew them. Well, one time we had a professor a professor of pediatrics who bet us one day that a certain lab work would on a child would turn out a certain way. She was just sure of it. And she said, I'll bet you a bottle of Jim Beam, or I don't know, her favorite booze. and when the lab work came back the next day, she was wrong. And there was one of our classmates that said, I'll take that bet, And so She came the next day and she had the bottle of booze under her coat. Because of course what she was doing was not sanctioned by the hospital. So anyway, she gave it to these guys, and a couple of weeks later, on a nice October afternoon, the guys, I was in their rotation. There were four of us in this rotation, and the three guys have said to me, let's go fishing. And, I said, well, sure, let's go fishing. Well, they wanted to go to Balboa Island, and off the coast of Balboa, they could rent fishing equipment and a boat. And it sounded dangerous to me, but I said, all right, but I get to drive. So we had my car, but these three guys came with me, and we were going to where they wanted to go. And they brought this bottle of booze with them, and I didn't know it. But they bought a pack of 7-Up, and they said, here, want some 7-Up? And I said, oh, sure. And they handed me this, and they spiked it with their booze. And I took one drink of it, and it was, it wasn't hard to figure out that it had something in it that I didn't want. And so I threw it out, but I just dipped it. I'm the only one who caught a fish, but I did. And when we had to go back, the guy said, I was really glad I brought my car, because they said, let's go to Tijuana. No, we're not going to Tijuana. Oh, come on. Obviously they were drunk. They just finished off that bottle of booze. And they said, okay, let's go to Tijuana. No, not going to Tijuana. I'm driving. Remember, this is my car, and we're going back. And two of them had to work that night. And they worked in a lab. And so we went back, and their cars were in the parking lot at the hospital. And I took them there and dropped them off and went home. And they called their wives and said they had to go to work. They called work and said they were sick, which they were. And next thing I knew, they were knocking on the door of my apartment. I didn't know they knew where I lived even, but they did. And they just came blustering in, and they were so drunk. Anyway, I fed them food, and I gave them coffee to drink, and we talked for hours, and finally, they had driven to my apartment, but they went home and to their loving wives. But it was one of those experiences that you have, and we've talked about it. My class gets together about every 5 years for a trip, a cruise or something like that. We went to China one year. Another time we went to Australia, etc. So there's a kind of a core group of us that have done this all along, and ever since our 25th anniversary. And so, and when we get together, any of these three guys with me, but we had a lot of camaraderie among us, and the guys, they were good to me most of the time. We'd go to lunch together at the hospital cafeteria, or we'd decide to go out to lunch to some little Mexican restaurant in the neighborhood or something, and we had good times, and I babysat for a lot of them. They had families, and they decided to take their wives out or something, and I'd go to their house and babysit for them. And you know, it was cooperation. We worked together late at night and during my internship. And so anyway, it was good.
Did you offer to babysit for them, or was that something they asked you to do?
Well, obviously I offered because I, they probably didn't think about it, but I loved kids, so I didn't mind, and they were having babies while, their wives were having babies while they were in school. So they had a lot of stress on them. They worked hard, they took on extra jobs to support their family, and they had wives who worked and took care of kids and, all that sort of thing. So if they had a date night, I would say, take your wife out, I'll take care of the kids. So and the kids were different ages. Some of them new babies, sometimes older kids. And I have a lot of fond memories of their kids.
And these were your co-interns? Did you work with them after that year of internship?
No,
No. And you mentioned earlier that you hadn't really faced discrimination as a woman doctor until after med school. Was that during your time working for the county?
but I have one incident that I remember very well. I was working, it was in the summer when school was out, so I was doing outpatient clinics and we did them out in the park in the summer, a well baby clinic where the women of the neighborhood would bring their baby to a well baby clinic, and we'd give them their shots and do an exam to see that they were appropriate for their age and how much development they had, and so forth, and advise them about what to feed the baby. And anyway, it was a well baby clinic. And I was doing 2-3 of those in a summer afternoon, but I could work in a hospital emergency room. And I worked through a company that placed me in different emergency rooms. And there was, when you get to one hospital and you like the people and they like you, and then you can get more jobs at that place, and you don't go to other places. So that's what I was doing. I was working at a particular hospital, and it was in the daytime, and the ambulance had just brought in a young man who had was bleeding profusely. He had cut his radial artery with a box cutter, and it was just pumping out of him faster than scat. And so I was trying, the nurse that was helping me to put a tourniquet on, and then I was working on the other arm trying to get a needle in his arm to force fluids, because he was losing a lot of fluid. And we had ordered blood and all that, but anyway, I've got the needle just ready to go in. And this doctor is walking by in the hall outside the ER, and he looks in and sees me about to start an IV. And he comes running in and he says, "Since when do we let nurses start IVs?" And I said, "Well, I'm the doctor." And oh, he was so embarrassed. He apologized. And he apologized to me so many times after that. I tell you, every time he'd see me, he'd be saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry for I mistook you for a nurse." "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." But that kind of thing, that happened not infrequently, that I was mistaken for the nurse, not the doctor. But and it was, men were becoming nurses more then. And so it was even more confusing when you get a male nurse. And male nurses like to work in the ER. So that was not an unusual situation. But anyway.
So they would mistake you for the nurse, and would they also mistake the male nurse for a doctor?
Sure. Yeah. So they wanted to push me aside and have him doing whatever. But I actually, at the time, it was a female nurse that was working on the guy's other arm, trying to put a tourniquet on because he was bleeding. And I was trying to start the IV. So the two of us had our heads down and were really at work. And it was just too much for this poor guy to see. But now, well, nurses start IVs, doctors don't bother with that kind of thing. And but those were different days. That was in the 60s.
How did you respond when that happened to you?
I just calmly said to him, "I'm the doctor." And and he'd really broken my intense about to start the IV, and so he'd taken my thought away from that and startled me. So but I wasn't impolite of putting him down. I understand, that kind of mistake would be made because there aren't very many women in medicine, and we had an ER nurse male who liked to knit, and he was really mistaken frequently for the doctor. But he was putting out baby sweaters like crazy when we had any downtime. Things got more frantic in ERs, and they learned that they needed to have a specialist to to deal with what needed to be done. So I think that it's a good idea now that they have people who are well trained as ER doctors, and they have to. Family practice doctors and ER doctors have to take the exams every 7 years to keep their certification, which is good. Many of the others don't. OBGYN and internist and surgeons, and they don't have to take the exams again.
Why do family doctors have to take them again?
There are places in every state that are set up to, you know, to have you do it. And a lot of times it's at a university. I went back to Linda and took my exams.
When did you get married?
Oh, yes. I was a practicing physician when I met my husband. And so I always told him he knew what he was getting. But we met in the fall of 1964. And so I was just a little while out of my internship. And I decided that I had missed out on a couple of things in my life. I had always wanted to take ballroom dancing lessons, and I always wanted to take French. I took French in high school, but I had to take Spanish in college, which was much more practical, of course. When I worked in LA, I had many patients who only spoke Spanish, so I got fairly proficient in Spanish, especially in medical things. But anyway, so I signed up for a night class at the local high school for French. And then I called Arthur Murray, and I was going to sign up for for a dance class. And so I had an appointment. I was working at schools at that time, and so I got off about 3:30. And then I had to drive usually across Los Angeles because I had schools on the west side a lot. And so I made an appointment like for 5:00 at the Arthur Murray. And I got a flat tire on my way. So I called them and said, I have to cancel. And they said, well, okay, we understand. You want to make another appointment? And I said, I have to wait to get my schedule when I'm working in ERs in order to make another appointment, because I don't know when I can. And okay, she said, you call us when you, okay. So I hung up and got my tire fixed. And then I went home. And the next night, I got a call from a man with a deep, sexy voice. And he said that he worked at Arthur Murray. And he wondered why I had canceled, and could he make me another appointment? I still didn't know my schedule, but I told him that I'd gotten a flat tire and so forth. So the next week, I'm called when I knew my schedule, and I made an appointment, and I went in to see this man with the sexy voice. And he was my dance teacher. And so I signed up for 6 weeks of classes, two times a week for 6 weeks. And, at the end of the 6 weeks, he says, oh, you're doing so well, you should extend for another 6 weeks. I could really make a great dancer of you. Well, I figured out by then that I had 2 left feet and that it wasn't, wasn't all it was cooked up to be. So I said, no, I'm not doing that. And he said, well, you sure? I said, I'm very sure, and I'm not gonna do that. So he said, well, I can't date students, but as soon as you're not my student, I could take you out to dinner. I said, well, that sounds all right. I guess I could go out to dinner, and that's how I met him. And very quickly, I think we'd only been out maybe on 2 or 3 dates. He said, I think I'm gonna marry you. And I laughed at him. I said, oh, I don't think so. My dance teacher? No, I don't think so. Well, he says, I'm studying real estate and I'm not gonna do this forever, but I'm gonna sell real estate and I can make more money and support you better. I still laughed, but a year later, 18 months later, 15 months, got married. And 1964, 66, May 1st, 1966, we got married. And I was working a lot, and I would work in the summer, I would work for a doctor that I knew who would like some time off. And so she'd go on vacation for a month and leave and practice with me. And so every time he and I would try to go somewhere, in those days, we didn't have cell phones and we didn't have, we had an answering service. And if we'd go to a movie, I'd have to go and find a phone in the middle of the movie and check in to see if somebody called for me. And it was very annoying for him. And so, he really didn't want this disrupted life. So I said, well, okay, I guess I have to figure out something else. I'm not gonna just go into practice with this person, this lady. This was a woman doctor in the community, and she would have brought me into her practice because she was too busy. But I knew I couldn't do that because it was too disruptive to family life. So when we got married, I promised that I would only be employed. And so I worked for the government, one kind of government or another, for all my days, because I worked for LA City and then LA County. And then we moved to Idaho. And I worked for the health department in Idaho. And I worked for the Indian clinic and on Fort Hall Reservation. And then I got a job working at the INL, the nuclear research facility. It's out in the middle of the desert in Idaho. We lived in Pocatello. My husband worked with my father for 4 years, and then he opened a store similar to ours, so that he had a retail store that sold restaurant equipment and so forth. And he drove from Pocatello to Idaho Falls, where our store was. And our middle son, decided he liked to work with his dad, and so he did for 10 years. And then Mike retired, and that son has our store now. He manages it. So we have 3 children. The oldest is an attorney here in Salt Lake. He's married to a doctor, an epileptologist, and he has 4 children. And I have a son in Idaho Falls, Idaho, who runs Rush's Kitchen Supply. And he's married and has a stepson who is a librarian in the university, and a daughter who's a senior in high school. And then I had two boys. I said we could fill the backyard with boys, and I want a daughter. So we adopted our daughter, and she's been a real joy. She has become a speech pathologist. She works at a hospital, and she is married and has 2 sons. One is in college, learning to be a forester, the government jobs that count the fish in the streams and all that. That's what he wants to do. And then her second son is in training to be an airplane mechanic. He's in a program in Norfolk, Virginia. And so anyway, we managed to have 3 children. We had a nanny who lived with us during the week and took care of our house and our children. And then she was off on the weekends. And but we couldn't have done it without her.
So you said you had promised your husband that you would only be employed. Is that as opposed to running your own practice?
Yes.
Okay. And that's what the woman doctor you were working for previously was doing?
She was in private practice. She had a practice of her own.
Mm-hmm.
She was in her 50s. And she had too many patients. So
Had you considered private practice before that?
I did, yes. Most people did, and most people just went out and hung up a shingle and started practicing medicine after their internship. And I considered that, but I knew that might be kind of hard to do, to balance everything. So I've had a lot of young women doctors talk to me about how do you manage a family and a practice. And I tell them, you have to learn to compromise. You have these dreams of being the greatest surgeon in the world, or, whatever. But what you end up doing is, working for the government, doing just clinics, outpatient clinics. And it's a very worthy thing to do. You don't have to be the best surgeon in the world or the best of whatever. You just have to be proficient at what you do. You have to do a good job. But you can limit the hours you spend and attend to your other to your family and their needs. But to do that, you have to be willing to compromise. And that's the secret to success. It's no secret, let me tell you, but you might learn it the hard way. That's not good. But yeah. And
And you
when
had always wanted a family?
Mhm.
Did you always know that you wanted a family?
Yes, oh yeah, sure. I did. And yeah, I had dated a doctor before I met my husband. And I realized that two doctors was gonna have a lot of problems because they're both going to be going in different directions and full time, so they'd never have time for each other outside of hospital stuff. So I decided against cultivating any further relationship with him, but I decided a dance teacher, a retired dance teacher who's selling real estate, that'd be all right. So
When did you have your first son?
when did I have my first son?
Yes, your first child. What year was that?
1967,
1967.
October 5th, 1967.
Where were you working then at that point?
I was working for LA City Schools. And in those days, they didn't like it that I was pregnant and coming to school and dealing with students. It was, they didn't know I was pregnant when they had hired me. Well, I wasn't pregnant when they hired me, but they didn't know I'd gotten pregnant because I'm out working in schools and I'm going to different schools every day. And I'm seeing children who have problems and examining them, talking to their parents, trying to get help for them with whatever was the problem, etc. And so I was like 7 months pregnant. He was born in October, and school went until June, like 10th of June, something like that. So, by then, the people that I worked with every day, they could see that I was pregnant, but I wasn't interacting with the boss downtown. And so I then, because you were supposed to not work after you were 7 months pregnant. And I kind of squeaked in there. The next time I got pregnant, wasn't so much because I had the baby the 9th of August. So, but I think people were loosening up and they were a little more, a little more willing to accept a pregnant doctor working. And so, and I worked all summer for the health department and doing well baby clinics in the park or working in a clinic, seeing patients. And they, by the time my second pregnancy was, they didn't really care. So, in fact, they were hoping that I'd be ready to come back to school in September. And I only missed like a couple of weeks that year.
So they did let you, did they give you maternity leave?
Without pay, yes, they did, yes. They just held a position open for me. And for 6 weeks with my oldest, and for it wasn't 6 weeks, it was more like 4 weeks. It was like 4 weeks with my younger son. So, and with my daughter, of course, I adopted her, so I didn't have to go through the pregnancy.
When did you adopt her?
She was born the 22nd of July in 1973. Yeah. And that year was the year of Roe v. Wade in January. And my brother had, well, there was a home for unwed mothers in Pocatello. And he was the doctor who took care of these girls. And so he had babies to place. He was forever trying to find homes for these babies. Now, of course, they went to an adoption agency, but he was involved in a lot of adoptions. Trying to convince friends and relatives that they wanted a baby, you know, but because there were so many. And so when I told him that I wanted a baby, I wanted a girl. And so he said, okay, I can get you a girl anytime now. But I talked to him in February. And in June, he called me and said that he had a woman who was a girl that was going to deliver. Of course, they didn't know what the sex was back then. So, I'd worked with kids enough that I knew that I wanted an easy delivery. Because if the delivery was complicated, or the mother was malnourished or whatever, that the kid would have more problems. So I told him I wanted a baby who had an easy birth and who was well fed, and you know the mother was well fed. And so he told me about this. Oh, and I wanted the baby to have brown eyes and dark hair. And because my husband was brown-eyed and had dark hair, but my sons had light hair. One of them was very blonde and in blue eyes. So I wanted this little girl. And so he called me. Well, I didn't hear from him for several weeks. And I thought, he told me this baby was going to be born right soon. I called him up and I said, what happened? And oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot to tell you. It was a boy, he says. So, and he said, you wouldn't have wanted him. The mother was scrawny and not well fed. And the baby had light hair and, you know, but it was a boy. That was the whole thing. So I said, never mind. I don't want a boy. I got two. So he says, I've got another one that's going to be due in another month. Well, and we were going to go on vacation with my family. We were going to go to Flathead Lake up in Montana in July, the end of July. And so we drove home and got there at 2 a.m. And my mother met us at the door and she said, your brother's got a baby for you. And I said, whoa, what? I can't deal with a baby. We're going up to the lake and everybody's gone. In fact, my brother had gone already. He delivered the baby the day before, and then he'd gone, taken his wife and kids to the lake. And so I said, well, I can't do that. And I tried to go to sleep, but I couldn't sleep. And so when I got up, when I got out of bed in the morning, I talked to my father, who's a very logical man. And I told him all the reasons I couldn't have that, to take that baby right then. And he agreed. He said, yeah, you shouldn't do that. You should just let it go. Your brother always has more. Yeah. Well, she was the last baby that he had from that home. They stopped taking because there weren't that many girls having babies. They were aborting earlier now that it was legal. And so there weren't so many babies. And that was the last one he had, was this little girl. But my mother, when she got up, she said, well, you have to go and look at her at least. So I said, well, yes, we could do that. So my husband and I went up to the hospital, and the nursery nurse brought her out to see us, and she was just perfect. I mean, she was 8 pounds and 3 ounces, and she just had these little rosebud lips, and well, I have to have her. And the nurse said, well, we'll keep her. We'll take care of her while you go on vacation. It'll only cost you $25 a day. This was in 1973. $25 a day in the nursery. And she said, we'll keep her for the week. And well, we couldn't have flown back to get another baby for that. So we said, okay, well, you keep her and take care of her and feed her, and we'll come back and get her. And so we did. We had a good vacation, and then we came back and we got her. Meantime, I had called my next door neighbor because I had all kinds of baby clothes and diapers and everything. And I told her where they were, and she boxed them all up and mailed them. And they arrived just when we got back from our trip, and so we had all the stuff we needed for the baby. And we got the baby, and we had to go to an attorney to sign all the papers and everything. And so we took her home in and we had a box, actually, a carton that my father had made just the right size for her to fit on the seat. And so anyway, a few days later, I was in a department store, and my 2 little boys were with me, and I was looking for clothes for her. And the lady was, she was talking to the boys about their adorable baby sister. And where did you get that adorable baby sister? And the older one said, we got her on vacation. And the lady just laughed out loud. She said, oh yeah. She looked at me like, you gotta stop telling them about the Cabbage Patch. and I said, no, we got her on vacation. And I told her the story briefly. And so she was, yeah, but we always told her she was adopted. And frequently I would tell people, she's adopted. And she was 5 years old. One day I was telling her, she was telling me, she said, I'm a doctor. And I said, no, I'm a doctor. well, you told me I'm a doctor. I said, no, you're adopted. Oh, so then we got a book that explained to 5-year-olds what adopted meant. She'd heard that all her life, that she was adopted, and that her mother was a doctor, which was different. So
It's precious.
that's straight out of it. But she's a delightful person, and we've really been blessed.
So, I just had a quick question about, you said your brother worked for, or he had a home for unwed mothers? What's a home for unwed mothers?
Oh, really? You don't know what that is?
Well, I can infer, but I just haven't heard of anything like that
Oh,
existing.
well, back in the day, there were many of those. The Catholic Church particularly had them. And the nuns would take care of the girls when they were pregnant. And it wasn't like the Handmaid's Tale, but it was a more genteel version. And the nurses actually took care of the girls. They got, they paid, their families paid room and board. And they lived in like a dormitory. And they had this in Pocatello. And in 1970s, in the 1960s and the 1950s, I remember the place for a long time. But girls who would be pregnant and not married, we protected them from the outside world. And then they had regular pregnancy care from my brother. And then when it came time to deliver the baby, he delivered. He had a partner also who worked with the girls. So he wasn't the only one, but they had 10 or 12 girls there probably all the time that rotated through.
And after Roe v. Wade passed, you said that they saw way less girls at that place?
Yeah, right. There were fewer girls. I think there were attitudes were changing toward unwed mothers and young girls, teens. The teen pregnancy has gone way down since those days. But then it was in January of 73, the law passed, and then we could do abortion, which is an easy procedure. That it's not complicated. It just and there are lots of reasons why you might need your uterus scraped for other causes. But they didn't teach me how to do that when I was in medical school, because they were protecting me from being tempted to perform an abortion because it was illegal and I would be put in jail. But I'll tell you this, there were a lot of girls who, mothers and girls who would ask about who did I know someone who would do an abortion, and it was an undercover thing, and I made it a business not to know. But one time I was working for a doctor who took a vacation, and I took over his practice for 3 weeks. And when he got back, I went to see him to get paid. And he reached into his pocket and pulled out $100 bills and handed them to me. He said, here's your payment. Now that's when I learned that I should definitely get something in writing from the doctor telling me how much he was going to pay me. Because the doctor that I worked for on a more regular basis, she paid me $1,000 a month. And this guy is giving me $300. But I took it and shut my mouth and said, I won't do that again. But I thought to myself, I know where he got this $300. He is doing abortions, and he got this $300 from that. I don't know whether he was or not, but it was very suspicious. And
Because it wasn't cash.
yeah, oh yeah, cash under the table, yes, definitely. But there were many teenage girls. I worked in several high schools, and there were a number of teenage girls who wanted to know where they could get an abortion. Could I please tell them? And there were so many of them who told me about their experience having had an abortion. Lots of them. I was just surprised at how many had gone to Mexico and had an abortion. Well, I had a patient when I was a student. I had a gynecological clinic, and the lady was 39 years old, and she had a more rigid abdomen. She was just in terrible pain, and she came into the emergency room at County Hospital, and they set her up to the floor, and we admitted her and did surgery, and she had sepsis all through her abdomen, and it was such a mess. And the doctor had perforated not only her bowel, but not only her uterus, but her bowel, clear up to small intestine. So there was a lot of it that had to be resected, and her uterus had to be removed. And we put antibiotic in her abdomen and sewed her up and gave her IV antibiotics and prayed. And she actually survived, which was a miracle. But when we got the path report back, she had a non-gravid uterus, which means she had never been pregnant. So she had missed a period, and she had an affair with someone that wasn't her husband, and she didn't want him to know, her husband to know. So she'd gone to Mexico and had an abortion. And whoa, I was so relieved when they passed that law. And now I don't know where you stand on abortion, but wherever you stand, it doesn't matter to me. You don't have to choose to have an abortion. but it should be a possibility legally. Because there are many, not just patients who decide to have an abortion just to get rid of a baby, but because of dire circumstances. Because sometimes a very wanted baby, that something goes wrong. And doctors now, in the states that have these ridiculous laws, are just making it impossible. And you know, I understand that you may have you may believe that it's murder to have an abortion. No matter that over 50% of abortions now are done by taking a pill. And that's early on, before this fetus is more than a blob, really. And it certainly couldn't live on its own, but that's how most of them are done. But it's people need to have choice. That's what I say. I might not want to have an abortion. I might think that it's immoral. But if you feel that you need it for whatever reason, that's your business. And it should be legal for you to choose that. But it's, I don't know, we got to do something.
What year did you retire?
I retired in the end of September in 2001. That was the year September 11th happened. And I was working that day. And I was working out at the site, it's the INL. And, you know, everybody was standing around watching the buildings fall at 7 o'clock in the morning out there. But anyway, I retired 2.5 weeks later on the 30th of September that year.
I'm sorry, where were you working at that time?
I was working at the Idaho National Laboratory, the nuclear facility that's in the desert where they're cleaning up nuclear waste.
What were you doing in that position?
I was a physician. They had 10,000 employees, sometimes more than that. And they did everything from digging ditches to nuclear physicists. And some of the jobs required monitoring chemicals and radiation. And if there was an accident, an accidental release of radiation, we had to deal with it. Chemicals, there were a lot of, the chemicals were more scary than the radiation, as far as I could tell. And then people had heart attacks and got the flu and fell off of buildings and broke their legs, and, you know, that sort of thing. So it was general practice. We had 4 doctors and about 25 nurses, and out at several places, actually, there were about 4 different clinic areas, as well as in Idaho Falls at the headquarters. We did exams on every employee when they came to work. And there were a lot of employees who qualified for annual exams, the firefighters, and we had the security guys. They all had to have monitoring and exams at regular intervals. So we had a full-on medical clinic there. We even delivered babies out on the highway that went by outside of our place.
Why on the highway?
Well, there was a highway, and it was a long way from Ashton. If you lived in a little town called Ashton, and you were having a baby, if you had any kind of problem at all, they were going to send you to Idaho Falls, which was about 50 miles. And so on this two-lane highway that went by our facility. And so if you were having a problem, you could call us and we'd send somebody to rescue you. And we did, actually. If there was an accident on the freeway, we would do the first responder kind of thing. And we didn't actually treat the people because that was beyond what we were authorized to do. But we could lifeline you from the highway to Idaho Falls to the hospital. You know, we had helicopters, and so anyway.
So like an emergency response type of
Yeah,
situation.
yeah, we did. And I loved it. It was a great job. I worked there 18 years. So
So what do you like to do now that you're retired? What sorts of things do you do?
well, I'm 87 years old at this point, so my to-do list is kind of short. I my husband restored antique cars, and so we did a lot of touring with friends who had cars. We belonged to organizations and so forth, and we did a lot of touring when he was alive. But he died 2 years ago at the age of 92. So now I'm alone, and we had just moved here about 6 months before he died. But we actually moved here because of me. I couldn't take care of him because I had a hip that was giving me fits. And so a couple of months after he died, I had the hip replaced, and I'm good to go again. It's very helpful. And but I'm glad I'm here because there are CNAs and RN here, so that I'm not alone. And I have friends that live here too, and we do things together and to go places. And we're going shopping tomorrow at a nearby shopping mall, and you know, they'll take us there, and they take us to our medical appointments. They take us to the grocery store and the bank if we need to go, when we need to go. And they do all the meal prep. So we don't have, there's a dining room. And so I can go there for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And if I want to. And if I don't want to, I have some basic facility here. I don't have a stove or an oven, but I have a microwave and a refrigerator, and so it covers what I need. It was good.
And are you in Salt Lake City?
Yes,
You are, okay.
I'm in Sandy, actually.
In Sandy,
Um,
close to your oldest son. Are they still in Sandy?
yes, right.
We started our interview with me describing you as a doctor, a mother, and a grandmother. How would you describe yourself?
Um, that way. Um, I have a wife and mother and grandmother. I, I'm a retired doctor. I wouldn't, you wouldn't want me for your doctor now. And so I don't see myself in that role now. I've been out of it for 23 years. So I don't even know what's what in the medical world. And but I have lots of great memories of when I was in that world. And I see myself, I know that I have a medical degree and it makes who I am by the experiences that I've had. But I see myself, some days I feel old, but I don't feel old most of the time. I have visions of getting up and going out and shopping and doing things. I Uber places because I don't want to feel confined here. And but I've given up driving. After my husband died, I decided I didn't, and I lived here. I decided I didn't need to drive anymore. And so one of my grandsons was going to college and needed a car, so I gave it to him. But and I don't really miss it as long as I know that I can go places and do things. I see myself, I travel. I would love to go to Europe or something, but I don't want to go alone. And I see myself as being a hazard to a group because I'm too old. And I don't move fast. So I would keep people, from moving fast. And I've been on trips where there were people like that, and it was irritating. So, I don't want to get in the way. And I don't need to. I've seen a lot of the world. My husband and I traveled a lot. We took our kids to Europe and and other places. And we went with my classmates. I've gone to my 60th anniversary graduation in medical school. And there were still 12 of us there. So, I've had a lot of good experiences. And I know that I'm too slow. I don't want to get in the way. But I see myself as a retired physician, that I'd say, as a retired physician. And but it's being a wife and a mother and a grandmother that I think make me the happiest. And I wouldn't have wanted to miss any of that.
And kind of going off that, looking back on all you've experienced and achieved, what makes you the most proud of your younger self?
Most proud of my younger self. I don't remember feeling proud about anything particular. I'm proud that I graduated from medical school. I think that's really something. Other than that, I don't know, I'm proud of my children and my grandchildren. And they give me great joy.
Well, as we close out our interview, thank you so much again for sharing your story with me and our audience. It was a pleasure, and I'm so excited about the impact it will have.
It's my pleasure, yes.